On a summer night in 1792, the Hartwell farmhouse fell silent. The lanterns were still lit, the hearth still warm, and a supper table fully set for 7 remained untouched. Yet not a single living soul could be found inside. By morning, neighbors noticed the windows nailed shut from within, the doors bolted tight, as if someone had locked the family inside. But there was no one to be locked. What they did find was far stranger. The floors were streaked with a dark, resin-like substance that smelled of sulfur and iron. A trail of tiny, bloody footprints led away from the barn, across the fields, and into the black Kentucky woods. No bodies, no explanation. The records of Fayette County show nothing about an investigation. No trial, no coroner's report, not even a burial. Officially, the Hartwells moved west. Yet every other family in the valley spoke in whispers. They didn't leave. They changed. The Hartwells had come from Virginia only 5 years earlier, part of the tide of settlers claiming Kentucky's wilderness. But even then, there were murmurs about them. A lineage too close, cousins marrying cousins, strange stillbirths in the family. Some said their ancestors fled from Alsace in the 1600s, where entire branches of their bloodline had been erased from parish records after an outbreak of fevered fits and unexplainable deaths. The patriarch, Elias Hartwell, was said to be a man of fierce discipline and scripture. Yet the local minister refused to let the family take communion. Their children, 6 in all, were rarely seen in daylight, and when they were, their skin carried a bluish pallor, as though their blood moved slower than others. Neighbors claimed that at night, you could hear Elias chanting from the barn. Not prayers, not psalms, but words in a language no one recognized. When asked, he claimed it was the tongue of Abraham, though no one believed him. The disappearance was retold for decades, but never written. Families swore that to speak the Hartwells' names aloud was to invite sickness. Still, fragments remained. A traveling peddler, who passed through the valley in July 1792, claimed he saw children with 2 wide mouths, staring at him from the tree line. A widow from the neighboring farm said she saw Elias Hartwell the night of the disappearance, walking barefoot through the fields, his body convulsing, his jaw unhinged in silent screams. And then, silence. The Hartwell property was abandoned, left to rot. Over the years, trespassers who dared enter the farmhouse reported walls slick with condensation in the summer, and floors that seemed to breathe underfoot. Tools left inside rusted in weeks, as if the air itself resisted intrusion. By 1810, the county ordered the farmhouse torn down. Yet the laborers refused to finish. They claimed something moved in the cellar, something that smelled of burnt copper and wet soil. The house was left half demolished, its foundation buried under weeds, as though the earth itself wanted to swallow it whole. But the Hartwell name did not vanish entirely. In the 1820 census, 2 children appeared in the Lexington Orphan Register, surnames redacted, but their listed birthplace matched the Hartwell farmstead. They were described as pale, undersized, with unusual growths along their spines. Both children were adopted by different families, and both died before reaching 18. Their deaths were written off as lung sickness. Yet the families who took them in reported something else. The children would not sleep in beds, but curled themselves in corners, whispering at night in guttural voices. One foster father, a stonemason, hanged himself in his workshop after carving the words, "They want me to join them beneath," into a beam. By mid-century, rumors spread of other orphans appearing across Kentucky. Always frail, always strange, always linked back to a single bloodline. The Hartwells, it seemed, had found a way to keep themselves alive, through children no one wanted to claim. In 1854, a professor at Transylvania University in Lexington uncovered what he called the Red Ledger, a book supposedly kept by Elias Hartwell himself. According to letters from the professor's students, the ledger contained not sermons, but diagrams of human bodies marked with sigils and circles. The professor claimed the book described a method of keeping the soul alive through binding it to the blood of the next generation. Weeks after showing the ledger to his colleagues, The professor was found dead in his study. His face bloated and blackened. His hands twisted backward at the wrist. The ledger itself vanished. The university denied ever having such a book, but some claimed to have seen it. Others whispered it still lies locked in a basement archive, sealed by order of the state. By the 1860s, the Hartwells were no longer a family. They were a rumor, a contagion, a mystery woven into Kentucky's soil, waiting for someone reckless enough to uncover it again. The Civil War brought soldiers through Kentucky's forgotten valleys, and with them came new witnesses. In 1862, Union troops marching near Lexington reported stumbling upon the Hartwell ruins. One lieutenant wrote in his field journal, "We found the cellar still intact, the air foul as brimstone." Private Kane swore he heard a woman humming below. When we pried the stones apart, there was nothing but claw marks on the inside walls. 2 days later, Kane was missing. His comrades claimed he wandered into the woods at night, barefoot, muttering strange words. His body was never recovered. His name was erased from official rolls as if he had never enlisted. After the war, locals spoke of the Hartwell Road, a stretch where riders claimed to see pale figures trailing their wagons. The war ended, but the legend grew darker. The Hartwells, people said, did not die, they recruited. The Catholic Church in Kentucky kept quiet records on the family. An 1871 letter from Bishop McGill to Rome mentioned a lineage touched by corruption, marked since birth, their very marrow unsound. He pleaded for guidance, asking whether baptism could cleanse such a family, or if their blood itself was cursed. Rome never replied. Local priests took it further. In an unpublished diary, Father Alton of Lexington admitted refusing last rites to an old woman who claimed to be a Hartwell descendant. "Her body was not her own," he wrote. "The bones twisted as I prayed, her teeth pushing through her gums until her jaw bled. I could not continue." That diary ended abruptly. The final page contained only a single phrase, repeated 23 times in red ink: "They are not meant to die." In 1894, the Lexington Orphan Industrial School burned to the ground, killing 43 children. Official reports cited faulty gas lines, but hidden records tell another story. Survivors spoke of a boy with gray skin and sunken eyes who walked into the dormitory and stood still until the walls caught fire. The boy was never found among the dead. Among the ruins, firefighters uncovered a mural carved into the stone basement. It showed dozens of children holding hands, their faces stretched into hollow masks, standing beneath the words, "The blood remembers." Though the orphanage rebuilt, its reputation never recovered. Rumors spread that several of its children bore the same traits described in earlier Hartwell accounts: strange posture, unusual speech, refusal of sunlight. Some whispered the school itself had been chosen as a feeding ground for the family's forgotten offspring. By the early 20th century, whispers of the Hartwells reached beyond church and town. In 1912, a physician working for the Kentucky State Hospital in Louisville claimed to have examined a patient with Hartwell lineage. The man, 30 years old, had never grown facial hair. His spine curved in 2 unnatural bends, and his blood tested thicker, darker than normal. Within days of publishing his findings, the doctor's notes were seized. He disappeared on a train journey to Frankfurt. Passengers swore he boarded, but he was never seen disembarking. Declassified memos from the 1930s suggest the government investigated rural Kentucky for genetic anomalies of national concern. No files mention the Hartwells directly. Instead, they reference the Fayette Project, an operation designed to sterilize families deemed tainted. Yet the project was shut down mysteriously in 1938, its records sealed by the Department of War. By the 1940s, the Hartwell name was no longer spoken. Families changed surnames, graves were left unmarked, and the farmhouse site grew wild with briars and ash. Visitors who stumbled onto the land described an unnatural silence. Birds refused to sing, insects would not cross the soil. One hunter swore he saw the earth rise and fall, as if something beneath was breathing. In nearby towns, residents claimed to suffer shared nightmares, dreams of pale children knocking at their doors, whispering in unison, "We are still here." Psychiatrists dismissed these accounts as wartime hysteria, yet the nightmares persisted for decades. By mid-century, the Hartwells had become a phantom story. Not folklore, not history, something in between. And like all buried things in America, it waits for those who dare to dig too deep. In 1946, after the war, a private physician named Dr. Howard Winthrop moved into Lexington. His journals, discovered only after his death in 1962, described patients he believed were descendants of the Hartwell line. He noted that their bodies aged unevenly, hair white before 30, but teeth erupting like those of children, fresh and sharp. Winthrop grew obsessed. He recorded that one patient, a young woman, showed no pulse for nearly 3 minutes during an examination, yet remained fully conscious, her eyes wide, whispering, "We are always between heartbeats." He was never able to publish his findings. Instead, he cataloged them in a private ledger of his own. Its final page ends abruptly. "They do not pass their sickness on. They pass themselves on. The blood is only the door." Not only doctors were burdened with the Hartwell shadow. In the 1950s, at St. Joseph's Seminary near Bardstown, novices reported being awakened at night by voices echoing in the halls. The voices did not belong to their fellow students. One novice claimed to see a group of children gathered in the chapel, standing hand in hand before the altar, their faces blurred as if erased. When he confronted the rector, the boy was expelled and never spoken of again. Whispers among the clergy suggested that the Hartwell bloodline had been infiltrating seminaries for decades. Young men with strange endurance, unusual memory, and an uncanny ability to sway their peers. They entered training but rarely completed it. Most simply vanished, their names scratched from the rolls. The Hartwells, it seemed, were never meant to vanish. They did not multiply in ordinary ways. Instead, they insinuated themselves into other families, through adoption, through stolen infants, through marriages that left no living trace except children who did not resemble their parents. By mid-century, some genealogists noticed peculiar gaps in Kentucky family records. Pages missing, names blacked out, dates rewritten. Entire generations of settlers seemed to fold into shadows, replaced by unfamiliar surnames with no traceable roots. It was as if the Hartwells had become less a family and more a disease of memory, rewriting bloodlines to conceal themselves inside America's history. Whispers of government involvement returned in the 1950s. Former state employees claimed that basements beneath the old Fayette County Courthouse once housed specimens, jars of thick, dark blood labeled only with initials. An unnamed janitor spoke decades later. "They kept the children down there. You'd hear the singing through the vents. Not hymns, though low, buzzing sounds, like a swarm of bees, only made with their throats." By the early 60s, the courthouse was demolished. All records vanished. The children were never seen again. Some claim they were moved to private institutions, others that they were buried beneath concrete foundations. Yet rumors persist that the Fayette experiments were less about control and more about partnership. That someone inside the state wanted to learn from the Hartwells, not destroy them. Every story circles back to one idea. The Hartwells are not gone. They are hidden, not in towns, not in ruins, but in us. In the silences of our genealogies. In the children who don't look quite like their parents. In the illnesses that cannot be explained, the mutations never fully traced. The horror is not that a single family disappeared in 1792. The horror is that they may have never left. That their blood was never tainted. It was deliberate. Preservation. An experiment that slipped free of control and merged into the American body like a parasite. And if that is true, then perhaps the Hartwells are not waiting in the soil of Kentucky. Perhaps they are waiting in the marrow of whoever is listening to this story right now. In 1974, a retired state archivist named Lillian Marrow gave an anonymous interview to a regional paper. She claimed that while working in Frankfurt, she was ordered to destroy files marked Fayette/1792. Inside were transcripts of interviews with families who reported Hartwell visitations well into the 20th century. One file, she said, contained a single sheet of parchment stained brown with age. On it was scrawled a phrase in shaky handwriting, The marrow holds the hymn. We are sung through the blood. The paper never ran the story. Lillian died that year in what was officially ruled a gas leak. Her house, curiously, was stripped of all personal papers before her body was even identified. In the 1980s, urban explorers trespassed into the abandoned Transylvania University tunnels. They discovered a sealed chamber known unofficially as the Whispering Room. On its walls, in faint chalk, were hundreds of children's names, none recorded in the school's enrollment logs. Recordings from that night capture low voices on tape, though no one present admitted to speaking. One voice repeats the phrase, "We remember the woods. We remember the blood." Soon after, the explorer's leader was institutionalized for what doctors called dissociative breaks. He never spoke of the tunnels again. By the 1990s, geneticists began publishing strange anomalies found in blood samples from rural Kentucky families. They discovered irregular hemoglobin density, unusual immunity to certain diseases, and inexplicable traits passed down generations. Unofficially, some researchers whispered about the Hartwell marker, a pattern in the DNA that seemed less like mutation and more like insertion, as if something had been placed deliberately into the human code. The deeper they dug, the stranger the results. Patterns emerged not only in Kentucky, but scattered across the Midwest, even as far as California. The Hartwell bloodline had not only survived, it had spread. In 2007, construction workers near Lexington unearthed a buried foundation, believed to be the remnants of the Hartwell farmhouse. Beneath the stone cellar, they found small wooden coffins, but not a single skeleton inside. Only bundles of hair, fingernails, and teeth. Weeks later, residents nearby began reporting pale children wandering the edges of their property lines at dusk. Always barefoot, always silent, always watching. Police investigations found nothing. Yet dogs refused to go near the fields, howling until their voices broke. Some say the Hartwells never left the cellar at all. They only shed their bodies, piece by piece, waiting for a time to walk above ground again. The story of the Hartwell family is not just Kentucky's story. It is America's, a history carefully excised, sealed in ledgers, erased from sermons, burned in courthouses. And yet, the memory persists, in whispers, in dreams, in the unease of empty rooms. The Hartwells are not a family. They are a lesson in what happens when corruption and secrecy are allowed to fester. When institutions, churches, and governments all decide that forgetting is safer than confronting. Perhaps their bloodline still walks among us, quiet, patient, hidden behind new surnames. Perhaps it lingers in your own family tree, a shadow behind your great-grandmother's smile, a sickness no doctor can name. Because the Hartwells did not vanish in 1792. They are here. And if you've listened this far, maybe they have already found you.